Well, g'day curd nerds. Today we're going to be doing a review on the Fromaggio cheesemaking machine. Now, I'm not going to do an unboxing and a review just without actually having tried using the machine. What I'm going to do during this video is make 4 different cheeses from the menu that the Fromaggio has, and I'm going to show you what I did, how I made it, what the outcome was of each cheese, and whether I think this machine is worth purchasing. Now, before I go any further, one thing I must state, and that is this is not a sponsored video. The unit was given to me as a review unit, so I'm allowed to keep it, which is great, but no money has changed hands during the course of the conversation that we had with Fromaggio. Now, there's been many things said about this unit. I've certainly seen a lot of information on the Fromaggio, whether it be misinformation or praise for the machine. So during the review, I'm going to get to the bottom of all that, and we're going to look at the pros and the cons as we go through each recipe and each part of the cheese making process. So this is an Australian model, has the Australian 3-pin plug on it, so I've been told. And you can tell down here, different, they've obviously got a model for EU, for UK, US and Australia. So this is the Australian version. This is a beast. Hang on, I'll put it on the floor and then I'll lift it out. Ugh. Goodness me. We have the book. Alright, so it comes in foam. We've got some bits. I think that goes all the way through, so we'll just take that bit off. That are connected. So here's the top bit and the base. Let's have a look at the socket, see if it's really the Aussie one. We're not going to get far in the review, are we? Hey, yeah, the Aussie 3-pin plug, so very good. Right, so that's a good start. So the machine has suckers, so it sticks on the countertop. There's an on-off switch down the bottom. So now we've got access to the little screen thing. And there's a little spinny thing. Yep. And some contacts. We'll see how that works when we actually make some cheese in it. But what have we got here? So we've got a lid with a rubber seal. Something else. Right, even though this looks like copper, it's not really. This is just the aesthetic. It's stainless steel on the inside. Oh, there's something. Let's go curd cutter maybe, I'm not sure. Out of danger. Also got a basket of sorts for curds. Not sure how that all works, but we'll get to that as we figure out how to use this. So that sits on this somehow. No, other way around. There's some contacts underneath for whatever reason. That's probably a heating element or something in there. And that stabs in. Alright, so there's some measurements on the inside. And I think it's 1 litre, 2 litres, 3 litres, 3 litres max of milk that you can use, because you're only going to make small batches with this. Alright, so what have we got? What's in these bits? Something there, and we've got an O-ring. Complimentary, this is a waterproof gasket for the mixing knife. Okay. just put that in there out the way and put that on top. Yeah, there we go. Does that go on there? Oh, look at that, it closes down, locks. Like a bit like a mix master. That, obviously, oh, you can turn that as well, lock that. Look, a big toothbrush for cleaning. All right, what else we got here? All right, okay, so we got some, get off. Got some cutting paddles by the look of it. So that's a small curd size, that's a large curd size. Last but not least, we've got this, looks like it's for draining of some sort. It's a sieve mesh, very fine mesh. Stainless steel, it's a little bit sharp, but that's okay. Not as in, you won't cut yourself, see? No cutting. It's just, it just feels unfinished. Could do with a good sand, I think. But it's stainless steel. Anyway, let's open up the user manual. So the user manual, does it have pictures? No, it's all in English. Okay, and you can, there's obviously a Google, there's an app that goes with it as well. Anyway, let me just, so that's the unboxing. That's what it does. Not sure what that bit does, but that's an extra. Oh, there we go. There's a rubber flange there. That's what this is. You get a spare. But I'm not sure what we would cut using this extreme looking chopper. It's quite sharp, so I will put that back in its little hidey hole. I don't want to cut my hands off. Does it fit in there? Yeah, there we go. There we go. Probably best to keep it in here until I need it. There we go. All right. Let me go away and have a read of the manual, and then we'll get back to it and see what we can do with it. So now we're going to clean the Fromaggio unit and see how easy it is to do that. But first I had to set it up and pair it with my home network. This is in 2-speed, or 2 times speed, and this is how long it took for the Fromaggio to start up. I think the software is based on Android, so it is a very flexible software that runs the unit, and there we go. It's all up and running now. Now I had to pair it with the app, but before I did that, here's all the pieces. So you've got a cutting blade, you've got a spatula, a little cleaning brush, you've also got the sieve there, 2 cutting wands or cutting blades, you've got the unit itself, and there's a shaft within the unit and a see-through lid. Now, very simple to clean. All I had to do was take the lid off and then pull out the basket. You can see it's got a little measuring cup there. It's actually got gradients on the side. You can measure stuff with it, which is pretty cool. There's the basket, the draining basket, and the unit itself has a shaft in the middle. Now you've got to take this shaft out to clean it. There's a lever on the back, and you just flick that over and then just pull the shaft out. Make sure it's horizontal when you do it, or the shaft will just drop onto the bench top, and that's good for nobody. Now the shaft also has a little has the grommet, or the O-ring on it, which you need to pull off, and we'll look at that in a second. Hello Hamish, what are you doing? Right, there we go. So there's the shaft there, and I'm just pulling off the rubber ring because stuff can get stuck under it. So we need to make sure that's clean. So I pulled that off there. Very simple to do. So in hot soapy water, I'm using a little toothbrush. This is the first time cleaning. I clean it between every single recipe that you see in the video. This is the shaft that's just been cleaned. I'm just cleaning the little measuring cup and the lid. The lid has a rubber ring that goes around it to make a good seal. So I just made sure I got in there with the toothbrush. You can pull that rubber ring out, but it's a bit of a pain to put back in again. So just cleaning the draining basket there and just giving a rinse off with hot water as well. And the unit itself, like I said, you can dunk it under there once you've pulled the O-ring and the shaft out. that can be washed. You can wash all this in the dishwasher. I just preferred to hand wash it the first time around, just to make sure that I understood what all the parts were. Pretty easy to clean the curd cutter. You just use the brush and get in through all the squares. And that was easy enough on the spatula. So everything's squeaky clean, including the draining sieve there as well. Now there is a cleaning mode on the machine which actually boils water. It's recommended in the manual to put it back together and boil some water in the pot, but there's all of the equipment placed there. I prefer to sanitize in a better way. So on to sanitization of the Fromaggio. Now there has been a myth that this is difficult to sanitize. I hope you find here in this video that I've busted that myth. I'm using Star San, which is a no-rinse sanitizer. So I just made up a few batches, about 15 litres I made, and poured it into the sink. And I used that as my sanitization vessel. And being a no-rinse sanitizer, this one's a foamy type. You can get no-rinse sanitizers that don't have as much foam. It's no big deal, doesn't really matter. Anyway, I'm dipping all of the equipment into the sanitizer and then letting it air dry on the side. So every single piece of equipment that comes in contact with the cheese has been sanitized with no-rinse sanitizer. Now this all happens after cleaning, as you can see there. Now I did rinse off some of the items with hot water afterwards. So I've drained the sanitizer there, laid out a clean tea towel to put all of the equipment on. So just transferring over and then rinsing it all off with hot water. Now you don't have to rinse off with hot water, it's a no rinse sanitizer, but I chose to in this instance. It doesn't damage the effectiveness of the sanitizer either. So just putting everything back together again. Now the problem is, and we'll talk about this in a second, is that there is no sanitization step in the Fromaggio book. This has since been rectified after a conversation, which I'll talk about later as well. But I've now sanitized all the equipment and I'm going to start putting it back together again, ready for cheese making. So putting the little O-ring seal, don't forget to put this on, because I tell you what, if you don't put the O-ring on and then put the shaft in the unit, your milk is going to pour everywhere into the base unit and the base unit will stop working. So it's very important to put this O-ring back on. So I'm putting the shaft back into the heating pot. So it just goes in one way and then close the lever. And it is stiff. You really do have to use a little bit of force to get it in there, which is good because you're getting a nice clean seal. And remembering that the O-ring has been cleaned and sanitized, so there's not going to be any cheesy bits underneath. So pop that back onto the top of the base unit and push it down to make sure it's seated in. Then pop in your draining basket. That just sits in there, and then put in the paddle that the recipe recommends, or the cutting paddle, stirring spoon, whatever. Okay, so that's sitting in there. That just sits in there. Ricotta, very simple cheese to make. There's the app on my iPhone, and you can pull up the recipe that you need to use in the app first and then transfer it to the machine. The machine does have recipes in it, but not the most up-to-date recipes, which can be transferred from the app. Now, Fromaggio have changed the recipe based on my recommendations and feedback. So the recipe you're seeing on the screen is the one that I used during the video. So, first of all, turn the machine on, go and select the recipe that you want to use, or update it from the app. So I chose to find it first on the Fromaggio machine, and go and look for ricotta, and chose beginner and then searched through. I wanted whole milk ricotta, and it tells you the equipment you need and how to set up the machine. It also tells you the ingredients that you'll need, and then it also shows you the recipe on the machine itself. But I did update the recipe using the app. So nice and simple. So I was just checking the ingredients that it said on the recipe there, that I had them handy and ready to go. So started the first step. it tells me that I must put it all together and then seat the curd cutter in properly, and then now weigh out the milk. So it takes 3 litres of milk, but because milk is denser than water, it's actually about 3,090 grams. So it actually has a scale in it. So I'm just pouring the milk in there. I'm using pasteurised, unhomogenised milk for this ricotta. So I pop the 3 litres in, and I'm watching the scale. I've got the jug over the display. It's a silly thing to do, but anyway, there we go. So I've got the right amount of milk. And it tells me what to do next. It says the lid's not on. So you've got to put the lid on and push it down and then twist it to lock it in place so nothing falls into the milk, and then you can proceed. And now it starts with the heating phase. And you press go and it starts stirring the milk and heating it at the same time. So now it says add in, I think it's 9 grams of citric acid. That seemed like a lot of citric acid to me in this. So it heats the milk up and then it tells you to add the citric acid. 9 grams, that's a lot of citric acid. And we'll see what happens in a second. There we go. So weighed out 9 grams. Put it in some water to dissolve it, as it does recommend in the new recipe. There we go. That's ready to pour into the milk. Now the milk's been heated, so I'm just taking the lid off there. You don't need to take that little measuring cup off. That was a mistake. But yeah, just take the lid off to pour it in. You could pour through a little hole, I suppose, but I wanted to have a look at the milk. I wanted to check the temperature of the milk to make sure that it was at about 90 like it said. Now, problem was the temperature gauge on the unit, and I've had a discussion with Fromaggio since, it only measures the heat of the pot, not the heat of the milk. So the heating time in the recipe was not long enough to bring the temperature up to 90 degrees as it stated. So this has been given as feedback back to Fromaggio, and they have updated the recipe since. So I could tell there that not a lot of the proteins are precipitated out of the milk, so we're not getting a massive yield there, that's for sure. Anyway, so you put the strainer underneath the draining basket like thus, and then set a timer for draining as per the recipe. There we go. You've got some ricotta in there. You can pull that out, pull a little cutting blade out as well, and I'm going to tip it into a bowl. There we go. Just plonks out. And it now says to put salt, so I put salt on the ricotta. Just salted it. So using the rubber spatula that came with the unit, I'm just giving that a bit of a stir. It looked suspiciously like rubbery ricotta before you actually microwave it when you make quick ricotta. It's far too much acid in this ricotta for it to be smooth and creamy, that sort of thing. So I wasn't happy with the texture. Now Kim and I used this in a ricotta tart, which members will be getting a video of that, making the ricotta tart at a later time. Members only. Sounds a bit like OnlyFans, but different. Anyway, there we go, all smoothed out. And I'll pop that into the fridge now to just settle down a little bit and firm up. On to Queso Fresco. This is a very simple recipe. They have updated it based on my feedback and recommendations. So I'm just scrolling through the menu there on the app and looking for the recipe. There we go, Queso Fresco. And you can update it to the machine and then send it through. Now the recipe has changed, like I said, based on my recommendations. So what you're seeing on the screen here is not the same recipe as currently exists on the app. Anyway, moving right along. So I went through the cleaning and the sanitization process again, as you should before you make any cheese. Pop the basket and the unit back on, and we're getting ready to put the right cutter in. So I'm using the soft cheese cutter there, which has the wider holes in it, the wider squares. Got everything laid out ready to go, as you should when you're making cheese. Now, I've made this cheese before on the channel, and you can check out the link to that in the info card now. So turning the machine on, looking for the recipe that I want to use. But what I did, I pushed the recipe to the machine via the app. Now, I tried to use the search function. I couldn't quite get that to work. Maybe it was just my fat fingers. But I found the recipe fast enough. I wanted to see what equipment it told me to use. So using the right cutter, size, and now it's time to weigh out the milk. So popping in 3 litres again. It only takes 3 litres of milk. Now, I put too much in, as you do. And trying to put it back through that little hole in the bladder that I bought the milk in is difficult, to say the least. Anyway, I got to the right level eventually. There we go, perfect. And on to the next step. And we're just going to add the calcium chloride now. Just a few drops, as it says in the recipe. Now onto the next step, and this is the heating and stirring. So pop the lid back on or it won't let you go any further. There we go. And press play. And the little thing should start stirring in the calcium chloride for you. So once that's all done and the next step comes up, I just wanted to check the temperature. And it was at about 27 degrees, which is fairly close to what the recipe said. So I'm happy with that. Now we're going to add in the starter culture. I'm using the cultures that were provided by Fromaggio for the review. So I'm just snipping off the top there and putting in everything. Now the back of the packet says that this sachet is for the 3 litres of milk. So they're pre-measured quantities for the amount of milk that the machine takes. So on to the next step, which is to let the culture rehydrate. Just wanted to have a quick look before we went to the next step. Check the temperature. Now, I was fairly spot on this time, so the recipe was a lot better than the previous one. So now I'm adding the rennet. It's a powdered rennet, and I've added it to 1/4 cup of non-chlorinated water, and now I'm stirring that in to dissolve the rennet. Now, remembering that I'm following the steps in the recipe, I'm not changing it up or anything. So it says add the rennet in as well. There we go. Make sure that little stir is still in there properly, and then pop the lid back on. Lock it into position and we can start the recipe again. So press play and away we go. She starts stirring. So it's stirring the rennet in, and then it stops after about 30 seconds of stirring and allows the rennet to coagulate the milk. So this is a great step. It's in there. So then it says it's going to cut the curd once when it reckons the curd is set enough. It's just a predetermined time period, and it gives it a quick little turn. This is in normal speed. I haven't sped up the footage or anything. So a couple of cuts. Now remembering that it does horizontal and vertical because of the square sizes of the curds, so that's pretty good. So that's all done. There we go. Oh, still going now. So it's decided that the curds were cut. It actually let it rest for 5 minutes. I skipped that bit of footage, but it let it rest for 5 minutes so the curds would heal. And now it's stirring the milk, and it's going up in a couple of degrees as per the recipe. So it's stirring the curds, which is a great feature. You know, I didn't have to stir any curds and get sore wrists or hands. So I'm very happy with that feature of the machine. So once the stirring is stopped, you just take the lid off, have a quick look, and notice the top bits aren't cut. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but once you pull the curd cutter out, it doesn't really matter. Now, it does recommend that you put the salt in now. So you pull the salt over the top of the Queso Fresco before you drain it. This was, I thought, an error, and I've since given feedback and they've changed the recipe. So, because the salt has to be weighed per drained curd. So for this type of recipe, it should be about 1.5% of salt by weight of drained curd. So anyway, so we're going to drain the curd now, just lifting that up. And all the curd's nice and solid in there, and then we put the draining mesh underneath the basket, and we allow that to drain out. Now, it said drain for 7 hours, and I thought, hang on, I want to make some more cheese. I want to get the review done. So what I basically did was boil up a loose weave cheesecloth, and as you can see, I put the basket into the sink, and there's heaps more curd in there that was stuck between the basket and the pot itself. So I've got that on the, that's a cheesecloth lined colander, and I'm going to pour it all out. This one's to speed up the process. There we go, got most of it out. Using the spatula, there we go, very nice. So save as much curd as I possibly can. Perfect. And there we go, and there's curds, like I said, stuck in on the sides of the pot. So I'm using the spatula again to just scrape that off and get it all out. Okay, so Fresco was a small pressed cheese, and there wasn't any pressing instructions in the recipe, so I took it upon myself to change it, as you do. So I got the curds there, and I'm going to weigh them. I drained them for the 7 hours, it said, and they came out fairly firm, which was great. So no problems with that part of the recipe. So just weighing that on a clean bowl that's been sanitized. So I got about 784.9 grams of curd. So I did 1.5% salt on top of that because there wasn't enough salt. So I had to figure out what I was doing there. Right, there we go. So I got my calculator out on my phone and figured out what 1.5% was of the 780 grams was. It's about 11.5 grams, I think it was. So I added that in, even though we did add salt into the recipe. And I thought, no, safe than sorry. Don't want to muck up the cheese. There we go. So I weighed it out. There we go. We've got the right amount of salt. And then stir that through. Now I gave them feedback on the amount of salt as well, and they changed the recipe and changed all the steps in the recipe that I thought that wasn't quite right. So there we go. There's the 11.7 grams of salt. Absolutely perfect, and we're going to stir that through the curds. Get rid of the scale. There we go. Just with my clean hands and stirring that all the way through. Right, so I'm just going to I boiled this cheesecloth up as well, cut it to size, and put it in a small mould. There's a lot of curds there, so you don't want to use a much smaller mould than that. And then I just used pound weight. So I put 2 pounds on top and let it drain for 60 minutes, and then came back to it. And I had pressed it down fairly well, so I pulled it out, turned it over, as you normally do, with a Queso Fresco, rewrapped it, pop it back in the small mould, and then put the cheesecloth over. And then I put 4 pounds of pressure, which is about 2 kilos, on top. And did that for another hour. Then after the hour, pulled it out, turned it over. And it's starting to form a nice rind there, which is perfect. Pop that on top. So now I've got 6 pounds, or about 3 kilos of weight on top. And that's for 2 hours. So 2 hours later, pulled it off. So we've had a total of 4 hours of pressing, and yeah, it's formed up really nicely, so I'm very happy with that cheese. There we go, there it is. I wouldn't use a mould or basket much larger than that, because you're going to get a rather flat cheese. And I stored it in the kitchen fridge, and we ate it over the course of about a week. It was really delicious. See what Gav says about this.
Look at that Queso Fresco. delicious.
So on to the third cheese. I'm making pepper jack now using the Fromaggio recipe. It's been updated since I made this video, well, based on my feedback and recommendations. And you can see all the steps there. There's quite a few steps to this cheese. And overall, I was very happy with the recipe. So let's go through it and see how I made the pepper jack. So once again, clean and sanitize everything and then select your recipe from the app and then push it to the machine. Now if there have been updates on the app to the recipes, it will tell you to push them to the machine. It actually does it automatically and lets you know which recipes that it has changed. So that's a good feature of the machine. I'm just reading the recipe to make sure that I've got everything right and the right cutter in and everything like that. For this recipe I changed the cutter to the hard cheese cutter, which has smaller holes, and then weighing out the milk as per the recipe. There we go, spot on, or close enough. And then to the next step, add the calcium chloride in. Calcium chloride helps add soluble calcium back into the milk after it's been pasteurised, and then set the machine to heating mode, and it stirred it, and everything's in there. So I added the starter culture, and after it was heated, and then it gives it a whiz, and then stops after it's finished the ripening. And now I put the rennet in to help set the curds, and I forgot to press play. There we go. It gives it a quick spin and then stops, and then once it stops the rennet will set. So that's about 30 minutes. There we go, all done. Right, so this is after the rennet has set the milk. Yes, nice clean break there. I checked it with the spatula and then press play to make it do the next part, which is cut the curds. Just thinking about it. There we go. So it's cutting the curds now. It's nice short, sharp turns there to cut the curds. So after it's waited for the curds to heal, it then stirs the curds. This is sped up footage 400 times. So it looks like it's going fast, but it's not. It's really going quite slow, which is good. You don't want to fracture the curds as you cut them. So once it has cut the curds and stirred the milk, and it recommends that you pull off some whey in the recipe. So I'm just doing that. And then replace it with equal parts of boiling water out of the kettle. There we go, and then it gives it a stir to mix through the water, which basically washes the curd. So then tells me to drain it. And I'm just tipping out some of the whey there. You see there's a lot of curds stuck between it. There we go. So it says add the salt in now, so I'm doing that. And I'm adding in the pepper and the chili flakes into the curds as well at this stage. Put it on top and it should mix them through, which it does. There we go. So it's mixing through those ingredients. Very nice indeed. Don't have to do it by hand. Rightio, so now it tells you to put it into a press. So I'm just going to drain it a little bit more. Trying to figure out what to do here. You can see there's a lot of curds there stuck on the pot, and I want to keep those too. So I'm letting it drain for the time it told me to drain it for. So I had 2 small Gouda molds prepared with some loose weave cheesecloth, but I stirred the ingredients through again because there was some clumps. I didn't want clumps, I wanted it evenly distributed through, so that was easy enough. I put it into 2 initially. I thought, well, this is going to be a really small cheese. So I decided to do the clever thing and then put all of the curds from that second basket into the first basket. There we go, tip it all in. Gav, make 1 cheese, not 2. And there we go. We've got a nice big heaped pile of curds. Now, I did scrape down the sides of the pot and put them into the draining basket before I put it into the mould. So I did manage to save all those bits as well. And I pressed it for initially for 15 minutes with 1 kilo or 2 pounds of weight on top, just to close up the rind a little bit. So just taking the cheesecloth off. There we go. Turning it over and putting it back. And I put the 2 pounds back on, or the 1 kilo, for another 15 minutes, just to tighten up the rind a little bit. So I take it back out of the basket again. Now, remembering these steps are not in the recipe, and there's no baskets that come with it to make the cheeses, so you have to get those yourself. So I'm putting 2 kilos or 4 pounds on for 1 hour, just to tighten up the rind a bit. Now, I did remember that the salting, it didn't have enough salt in it. So I decided that I was going to dry salt the cheese, but first of all, I just up the pressure for 4 hours to 3 kilos or 6 pounds. And you can see there's the salt there. So I dry salted the cheese after I thought the pressing was done enough, and it was, so I just popped it on top of the follower there and poured salt all over it and just rubbed it in to make sure that it had enough salt. Now, this is a popular method in France of dry salting. So I just put it back into the basket, put the cheesecloth over the top, put the follower on top, and then put the weights back on. It's another 3 kilos or 6 pounds for 6 hours this time, which was overnight for me. So the next morning, I took the weights off and took the cheese out of the basket and had a look at it. Lovely looking little cheese. I'm glad I did that second salting to let it absorb some salt overnight. So that's a really good little result there. I recommend using the Gouda basket for these cheeses. Just enough curd, no problems at all. It's going to be a fiery little beast, that's for sure. So initially I air dried it before I vacuum packed it, just in the ripening box there, put it into the cheese cave at 13 degrees Celsius just for a day or two, and then vacuum packed it. So on to cheddar. This is also the Fromaggio recipe. It's been updated based on my feedback and recommendations. So what you see on the screen there is different from what you will see now if you look on the app. There are some steps that needed to be changed in this recipe, especially the heating. There was an error in the recipe, which I found. So I'm glad I did find it and change my steps accordingly. Anyway, so once again, clean, sanitize, put the machine back together again, put everything out on a clean tea towel ready to go before we start. So I'm just following the instructions, reading it, what I had to do. So I used the small cutter in the draining basket, and then I weighed out the milk. So this time I used a bladder instead of milk bottles, and I had exactly 3 litres in there. Or did I? No, I didn't. I had to put some more in and open up a second bladder. My goodness, my memory is terrible. Anyway, righto. So we got the right amount. Fantastic. So I popped the lid back on and started off. Now, I only had a heating cycle of 6 minutes to get it up to the target temperature, I think about 30 degrees, which was the error that I talked about. So I actually ran the heating cycle a lot longer. So I just restarted it and heated it up. Put the calcium chloride in there. There we go. That's all you need. And added the starter culture. There we go. Snip the top off and just put that over the top and allow that to rehydrate. The next step is put the lid back on, and then it just waits for 5 minutes before it starts stirring. There we go. Stir all the culture in. Lovely. Once that's all done, then the heating cycle, the ripening period, was about an hour, hour and a half, which was probably great because it compensated for the lack of heat in the milk before we added the rennet in. So I'm just adding the rennet to the water there, non-chlorinated water, and then I'm going to put that into the into the milk. So just pour that in, put the lid back on, and it stirs it in. This is sped up, so it looks like it's doing a mix master, but it's not really. So it just stirs around it in, and then it stops. There we go, all stopped. And then it allows 45 minutes for the coagulation. Then it cuts the curd for you, which is beautiful, and then it stops cutting the curd. And it allows the curds to heal, which it did, fine, no problems at all. Right, so after all of the stirring, just draining off a bit of whey there to make it drain better. There was you didn't need to add any water in or anything like that, because this is not a washed curd cheese. So pull the draining basket up and put the drainer underneath. After the allotted time of draining, then it was time to weigh the curds to check how much salt we needed. So I'm just pulling that out there, just using a little drainer thing, because I'm draining the whey through the strainer in the sink, which was sanitized, and then I'm going to scrape out the extra curds that were between the basket and the pot. I wanted to get all that curd, so that's what I've done there. So if it looks like I'm tipping on the sink, I'm not, just putting it into the strainer. So I'm pulling out the paddle, putting the extra curds in. The curds, because they were firm, didn't sink through the bottom. So now I'm just letting them drain there. Now, I'm just doing the cheddaring there. I'm just cutting it into quarters, as you can see, and just allowing that. Now, it needs to stay warm, so this didn't really work for me. So I just poured the curds back into the pot, because there was a warming feature in the recipe, and it wanted you to turn it over. It told you when to turn it over and all that sort of stuff. So the recipe was pretty good as far as cheddaring went, because, like I said, it heats the pot slightly to keep the curds warm. So I basically drained out any whey there, put it back in, put the 4 pieces back into the bottom of the pot and put the lid on to keep it warm. So great temperature control for cheddaring, so I was impressed with that. So once I turned them a couple of times, then you actually got to pull them all out. So I just put the bits on the lid, all the curds, and then now you have to change from the shaft to the cutter blade so you can chop up the curds. So that's fairly easy, not that hard to do. So I just undid the lever on the bottom of the pot and swapped out the blade, just to make sure it's in there. There we go, there's the chopping blade. Now this chopping blade's used for cutting curds like this, or it can be used to make vegan cheeses as well. So I'm putting the curd back in. There we go, and it chops it for you into decent sized pieces. Normally I do this by hand, but yeah, it does it, so I'm happy to follow that step. Remember, the curds are very drained by now and they're fairly firm, so any larger bits I just broke up with my hands, so that's no big deal. So it's time to weigh the curds. This is not in the recipe. I knew I had to add 2% of salt per weight of curds, so I weighed them out. Made sure I got all of the curds out using the rubber spatula that they give you. Anyway, there's 505 grams worth of curds there, so I'll salt it at 2%, so that'll give me roughly 10 grams of salt. Anyway, I did the calculation. There you go, 10.1%. 10.1 grams of salt, so I weighed that out into the pot as well after I tared or zeroed the scale. There we go, right amount of salt, stir it through. Now, there wasn't as much curds here as there was with the pepper jack recipe because of the cheddaring process that made the cheese drier, which cheddar is drier than pepper jack. So, I think the mould that I used was too big. So let me just say that there, this was my error, because there's no mention of any size moulds in the Fromaggio recipes. It just says press the cheese with a non-existent press they don't have. They've actually decided not to include a press. Anyway, I'm weighing that out there. I'm pressing at 6 kilograms for 1 hour just to initially get the curds to, the rind to form on the cheese. So I did that. pulled it out, turned it over. And as you can see there, it's going to be a fairly skinny little cheese. And I wasn't impressed with my choice of moulds there. I should have used the Gouda mould again. That would have been perfect. But this was the smallest cheddar size type mould I used. So back with the 6 pounds or 3 kilos for another hour, just to close up the rind. And that's all we're trying to achieve here. The curds are fairly dry, so not much whey's coming out, as you can see there anyway. There we go, we've got a little skinny cheese. Flipped it over, pressed it again. Same weight, but this time for 4 hours. 4 hours later, we'll just have a quick look, and it's even skinnier. But I persisted and kept going. Now, the advice I've had since is that for cheddars, cheeses like this with really dry curds, you should make 2 batches of curds and then combine them at the end. Now, I see some issues with this because the curds will be cold. And there's my final cheese. That's as closed up as I could get the rind. But 2 batches would certainly make this a thicker and larger cheese. So I air dried for a day and then vacuum packed this cheese and stored it at 13 degrees Celsius. So curd nerds, there's the 4 cheeses. Now, what were my thoughts on the machine? Well, I had 2 main issues. And the first one was that there were no sanitization steps in the manual. There was only cleaning instructions regarding the dishwasher, and then a subsequent, what they call cleaning for the pot, where you put the pot in, put some water in after you've cleaned it in the dishwasher. And it actually boils the pot, so it sanitizes that and anything else you put in there. So the second issue I had was the salt levels were too low in the recipes. So for soft cheeses, it's about 1.5% salt per weight of curds, strained curds, and for cheddars and pepper jacks and stuff like that, like I made, are supposed to be about 2% of salt per weight of curds, sometimes a little bit higher. Now, as far as software updates went, that wasn't a major issue. That worked really well. So when recipes were updated, they were pushed to the machine automatically if the app was on at the same time the machine was on. So that figured that out. That was really good. So some of the issues that I had, some of the recipes, with the ricotta recipe, like I mentioned, it didn't get the milk hot enough. So the initial heating time was not long enough. So I was concerned about that. The salt was okay. The salt level was fine. The citric acid, there was too much citric acid, and it kind of made the overall ricotta a little bit rubbery, so I was worried about that as well. And that was about it for the ricotta. The initial heating of the milk, there wasn't a long enough time frame in the recipe, so that was a concern. The sachets, it was my own stupid fault. I didn't turn the packet of the rennet and the thermophilic culture. I didn't turn the back over and read that it says each sachet is for 3 litres of milk. So I was a bit dumb there, and I decided to do some silly things which I actually cut out of the video because it was my fault. So yeah, I actually weighed, it said 2 grams of powder in the recipe, which it should just say 1 sachet, and then I figured it all out at the end. So that was my fault. So the salt content of the Queso Fresco once again was not high enough, so I added more salt. It mentioned 2 grams in the recipe, and I put in 11.7 grams, which was spot on. And overall, the recipe was pretty good. It was a good cheese. I really enjoyed it. As for the pepper jack, once again, not enough salt. So I changed the salt, and with that one, I actually hadn't really thought that through very well. So I dry salted it at the end. The cheese looks fantastic. The details in it were pretty good. There was a lack of maturation details in the recipe, so I provided feedback on this well. And it's aging very well. I vacuum packed it. It's aging well, and will be ready in about 2 weeks' time since I made this review. Now, the cheddar recipe, the salt levels were wrong. So, you know, that should have been 2% salt. So I gave that feedback. And then the heating of the milk, that wasn't long enough. So, you know, all these things are really easily fixed because the recipes are updated over the air. I was concerned about some of the things like sanitation, not enough salt on the recipe. They were my major issues. So I reached back out to Glenn, the founder of Fromaggio, and we had a 1-hour Zoom call where we talked about the issues and what could be done and all that sort of stuff, because I didn't want to go all Marcus Brownlee on the company and make the company broke by what I was going to say in this review. So essentially, I discussed my concerns with Glenn, and he said, yep, they're all easily fixed. They're all updates to the software. They're just recipe problems. So he said that he was going to do a few things during that meeting. So the results were that Glenn was going to add in, or get somebody to add in, the steps for sanitization in the manual. Absolutely needed to be done. And they also needed to review all of the Fromaggio-based recipes, because there are community ones as well. So change all the Fromaggio-based recipes to the right levels of salt and initial heating times. There was also needed to be some extra information about affinage, so whether it gets vacuum packed or waxed, or what you do during affinage. So they need to be put into the recipes as well. And then he was going to send me a updated manual with all those different changes. Now, the great thing is Glenn did follow up and has changed the manual, and we discussed some other things that could be really cool in the app, and that was having a help section within the app itself, where if they did need to change the manual, then they could do it in the app itself, and customers of the unit could basically download the PDF and print it out if they needed to, or just look on the app for the steps. So once I got back an updated manual, I was very happy. So all my concerns are kind of gone from the review, which is fantastic. So it's great to do this sort of review where you can give feedback to the manufacturer and they actually do change things. So I was very impressed with Fromaggio's response to my feedback before we even posted the review. So I'll go through the cons first. Initially, the recipes didn't heat the milk to the right temperature, but that has been subsequently corrected. The salt levels weren't high enough, and this was a major issue as far as I was concerned. And this was also fixed. The recipes were lacking some details, especially around maturation, and that's been fixed as well. The user manual didn't mention sanitization, and now it does, and it has good steps in there. The scales weren't that accurate. So I tended to use my own during the weighing of the ingredients and that sort of stuff. And the menus on the machine upon startup, and it might have just been me, that I thought they were a little bit slow to navigate. So when you're pressing it on the machine, but really you don't need to touch the machine that much, because once you push the recipe from the app to the machine, which is updated, the steps kind of just move on themselves as you do something. Anyway, but that kind of brings me on to the pros of the machine. So it heats the milk. You don't need to buy any extra heating equipment. And the great thing about you're moving through the steps on the recipe, if there's a long step and you want to go do something else, notifications pop up on your phone and it tells you go back to the machine and go do something. So I was very impressed with that. It cuts the curd, so you don't need to buy a curd knife or anything like that. It stirs the curd, so you don't need to sit there for hours on end stirring the curd. It does all automatically for you. The recipes with the steps can be updated over the air, which is a great feature. It also allows you to create recipes in the app and then push them to the machine, so that's a good feature as well. The consumables are comparable in price to cheese-making suppliers like myself, so I was happy with that as well. So the consumables, I mean things like the mesophilic culture, thermophilic culture, rennet, powdered rennet for hard cheeses and soft cheeses, calcium chloride. They're all decent prices, so that was pretty good. And also, like I said, it has a weighing scale, but I didn't find that very accurate, so I didn't use it. So they were the pros and cons of the machine. So as for the price, it currently sits at $785 US for the copper version, and it's a little bit cheaper for the stainless steel pot version. Doesn't make much difference. The stainless steel one is probably the one I'd recommend. So who is the Fromaggio for? Well, if you're a seasoned cheese maker like me and you've got all the equipment already, it probably isn't for you. However, if you're starting off cheese making and you want to get something that's all inclusive except for the press and the molds or the baskets, then this is probably okay for you. I would have no hesitation recommending it now that I've had a conversation with Glenn and we've talked through the issues and they've made fixes. They've made changes to the machine and the recipes based on my recommendations. So that is a really good thing as far as I'm concerned. Rarely do you get companies these days that will make changes to something based on a single YouTuber's recommendations. So very happy with that and very happy to work with Fromaggio in that, building a community of cheesemakers that will actually use the machine. So if you have accessibility issues, so I've got arthritis in my thumbs now and stirring for a long time and standing at a sink for a long time really does start to give me some pain. So, I think it's really good that the Fromaggio, cuts the curd and stirs it and heats it and does all that stuff for you when the recipes are right. So for an accessibility point of view, I think it's a great unit for people who have been scared to get into cheese making and want to try something on a small scale. And it is a small scale cheese. You're only using 3 litres of milk to make small cheeses. So it's not for big batches of cheese. And that's self-explanatory, it really is. If you want to make big batches of cheese, then you have to buy all the other gear and make it yourself in big stock pots and that sort of stuff. But for the beginner or just the curious home cheese maker, then 3 litres, perfect size. We demolished the Queso Fresco within 3 or 4 days, which was quite small. Like I said, I had about 700 grams of curds. The pepper jack is ready to be tasted now, but that only takes a few days to eat. But the good thing is, the machine doesn't take that much to clean, sanitize, set up, and go through the steps. I think it's a great little unit. So I busted some myths during the review and most definitely made 4 edible cheeses that were okay, especially after I made some of the tweaks that needed to happen and have subsequently happened already by the company to update the recipes. So if you're thinking about purchasing the Fromaggio unit based on my review, then you can get 10% off at the Fromaggio store by using the promo code SPREADTHECURD. I'll leave a link to the store in a QR code or down in the description down below. Now, if you do use my promo code or use the link that I provided, then I will get a small commission, which will help the channel grow, which is a fantastic thing. And you'll get many more reviews and cheese making tutorials just like this one. It's been a long one, that's for sure. So I hope you have enjoyed the Fromaggio review. So thanks for watching, Curd Nerds, and I'll see you next time.